name is Lauren and I am the owner of Backdoor Quilt Shop in Billings, Montana. Today we are going to show you how to make this simple burrito style pillowcase. So hopefully you'll learn from the little tips and tricks that we'll give to you and be able to make lots of these for gifts in the future. Thank you. We are going to start by making a simple video about how to make a burrito style pillowcase. And so I have started with my pieces. This is going to be my little accent strip, what we call our zinger. It is cut 2 inches wide by the width of my fabric. I have this piece which will be the header. That is 9 inches by the width of my fabric. And then my main piece of fabric right here is 27 inches by the width of my fabric. So I'm going to start with step 1, and I'm going to take my little accent zinger strip and I'm going to press it in half, wrong sides together, down the entire length of this strip. I do have a little bit of steam going on my iron so that I end up with that nice crisp press. Okay, all the way down. Just a little bit more. Now I do control the weight of my iron, so I'm not just rubbing it on there and ironing. I'm actually pressing as I go. So each time I go down here, I'm just kind of picking it up a little bit and sliding it down so it doesn't actually rub on the fabric. So I have that piece pressed in half. Now I'm going to take my header piece and I'm going to do the same thing with my header piece. So folding it wrong sides together down the length of it, and this is just so that I have a reference when I get done sewing it and need to press that. So okay. Okay, get that nice fold in there. Okay, so now the first step I'm going to do is I'm going to open this up. Okay, now this piece, with being my zinger, is going to go on raw edges all together. It's basically going to go into here and be in between my header and my pillowcase. Okay, so I need to do this all in one step. My fabric itself does look as though it has a right side up, and so I'm going to take this over here, and I think my heads up is up here, so that's going to be the top of my pillowcase. So I'm going to take my little accent strip and I'm going to line it up over here. Now I have not pressed or not cut off any of my selvage edges. I'm going to do that once I get all done with this step. So I'm just going to take this accent strip here, and I have my fold down here and my raw edges up here, and I'm just going to pin that in place, making sure that I don't stretch anything. I'm just laying it down there and pinning it. Oops. And you may not have to totally pin this all, but I just like to keep everything on track here as I'm getting this all ready. Okay, so now I have to take my header piece and I'm going to put my header piece right side down. My zinger strip is in the middle and my pillowcase part is on the back, and so I'm going to combine those two and can't tell. So I'm going to combine these two, and I'm going to sandwich that accent strip in between my header and my pillowcase. And I'm just going to do the same thing, and I just want to keep things lined up. Okay, so it's a little extra step. Okay. So when I do this step, then when I get ready to do the next step, this is going to keep me from having to worry about whether my header is straight on the grain. And you can see over on this side, my edges don't line up. And so I am going to trim this up when I'm all done, when I get ready to sew the other two seams together. So we're going to take our pillowcase part. I'm going to slide it up here. So take our pillowcase part here, and I'm going to roll it up. Okay, I'm going to take that header and move it out of my way and bring this all the way up. And I want to bring it up enough that I get it out of the way, because I'm going to wrap it inside of my header piece. But I don't want it so far up there I have to worry about catching it when I sew that. So if I better not pin that, otherwise I'm going to have trouble pulling it out. So I'm going to bring this around, and I'm just going to move it up like this. So now my pillowcase is rolled up in here, and I'm going to bring this straight up and over, line it up with my header piece, and pin that. And that's where I want to make sure that I'm staying on the green. Okay? So as I do this, I'll pin it a little bit more and keeping that zinger strip in the middle there. Okay. So I'm not stretching anything off to the side one way or the other. I'm keeping that header in an even, uniform circle. Okay, this one. Get all my raw edges together. So I have 2 raw edges from the header. I have 2 raw edges from the zinger, and I have 1 raw edge from one side of that pillowcase. Okay. There we go, and then I'll go from the center and go out the other direction. Now when I stitch this seam, I'm going to stitch it with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I'm going to shorten my stitch length, to a 1.8 stitch length on there. I'm using the 1/4 inch foot, so I know that my edge here will be a 1/4 inch. And this edge this fold here, as I sew this, I'm going to feel along there and make sure that that rolled up part of your pillowcase stays tucked down in here so I don't catch it in my seam allowance. So we'll go to the machine and we'll sew that seam. Okay, so I have my seam allowance in the center of my 1/4 inch foot, my needle, and I have set my stitch length at 1.8. Okay, and I am going to back stitch this. So as I stitch along here, I want to make sure that those edges stay together. Even between your pins, sometimes they like to kind of drift a little bit. you're uncomfortable doing this all in one step, you certainly can stitch down your accent strip with a seam allowance that is a little bit under 1/4 of an inch and stitch that to your pillowcase fabric, and that will hold it in place as you're doing this next step. Now whenever I stop the machine, I'm stopping with my needle down so it holds everything as I'm adjusting. Now I do give it just a little bit of tension here, a little bit of tautness as I'm stitching this down. Alright, so we are done with that step. Bring my pins with me. Okay, and so I end up with this big tube looking thing. Okay, so now what we're going to do, I'm going to get rid of those threads there. We are going to turn this right side out. So I'm going to grab it from this end here, and I'm just going to get it started here. And I can pull this out all the way through. Okay, let's see. Okay, and so what I have right now, shake it out, is this is what I have. So I have my header piece sewn on there. I have my accent zinger strip and my pillowcase. So I'm going to press this, and I'm actually going to start by pressing it from the back side because I would like this edge to press out. So I'm going to do a kind of a quick press through here, finger press it out and get the iron on there. Okay. And I don't want to do a real strong press at this point because if I have something kind of flipping back and forth on the front side, I don't want it pressed permanently in there, but I want to get this back edge pressed out. So now I can turn it to the front side, and now I can get in here because by pressing that the back side, I got some fold over here. So it pressed here, but I still have extra fabric in there to get away from that zinger strip, accent strip. So I'm going to go on that accent strip, and I'm just going to push the edge up and hold it. And push it up and hold it. And this will kind of get those edges away from the accent strip. Okay. As I go, I can kind of smooth that out there. So the fabrics that we're using, one of them is Dit Dot Evolution by In the Beginning Fabrics. The other is Dit Dot. And the third piece, which is our main pillowcase fabric, is a piece of fabric from P&B Textiles in their Euphoria line. Okay, Dit Dot and Dit Dot Evolution is a pretty basic line from In the Beginning. So you should be able to find these. I know we keep reordering them. This fabric here is a line of fabric that is no longer manufactured. We still have some in our store, and so you can always visit our website at www.backdoorquiltshop.com, and shop is SHOPPE, and you can look on there and see if you put in Euphoria, then it will show you all of them that we have available at that time. Okay, so what I'm going to do at this point then is I'm going to stitch my bottom seam and my side seam. Now, in order to make this where I don't have to have a serger or do an edge finish on it, I'm going to start by stitching them wrong sides together first. So I'm going to bring it over to my table, and I'm going to lay it out. Now, I do want this for a pillow that is going to measure approximately 20 inches across it. So if I did my cutting and my sewing pretty good, my edge down here should stay. That should match, and it does. And so I'm just going to put a couple of pins across the bottom to hold that in place so I can sew that seam. And then I will work with the side and the top and make sure that they line up. Okay, so if I'm going with my fold over here over to here, I am at 22 inches, and so I really comfortably need 21. So I look and see with my ruler. Let's see if I line this up like that and over here, then where am I with 20, 21? I'm going to miss it with this. This is going to be my fabric that is the smallest. So I'm actually going to trim it up at 20 inches, and that will get me top and bottom. I could probably squeeze about 20 1/4 out. But I let that determine how wide, and if you're getting just a little bit beyond the actual size of the pillow, it's going to be plump on there. So I'm going to put some pins down. Now I have a pin down here I have to move. Make sure it's out of the way when I go to cut this. And if you have a cutting mat that is big enough to hold this whole amount, then you don't have to try to measure and move and adjust. Is that going to get me beyond? Okay. Okay, I better move these over just a little bit. Okay. And I'm actually going to turn my cutting mat and make sure this edge and this edge. Now my ruler is not long enough to cut that in one cut, and I don't have anything to line it up from here to here. So I'm actually going to be cutting it like this. Okay, so that I can use lines on my cutting mat to help me. Okay, so I'm going to put that on 20. And I do try to pay attention to how much I'm dropping off the mat over here, because if I feel like I'm dropping too much and I don't have control, I'm not going to do it this way. So I have about 2 inches over here off the mat. I have 4 inches on the mat, and I can hold it closer to this edge and be able to cut and hold it snug. So I'm going to go a little bit at a time. I'm going to hold it real snug. I'm going to slice through there. This is going to be the hard part. There we go. I'm still lined up. So I kind of cut a little bit different when it comes to this, because I want to be able to get it all the way through without having to move my fabric and readjust it. There we go. Okay. So that is cut all the way through, and that, whoops, almost all the way through. There we go. Okay. And it's ready to sew. So the first thing, I'm going to sew it across the bottom and up the top. And I want to make sure that these line up. So I'm going to pin very carefully at the top here, because I want this fold line up here to line up, and I want these seams right here to line up. Okay. And if I was careful with my seam allowance, as I did the burrito, then I should also have these two edges of my accent strip line up. Okay, so I'm going to have those that way. Put all my pins on the same side would be helpful. And I'm going to sew this seam at 1/4 of an inch. Just shy of 1/4 of an inch. Okay, so we'll get those two seams done. I'm going to sew right up to the pin before I take it out to make sure that nothing moves in there. There we go. Approaching that corner, and then I can turn it. Now, I stopped where I thought I needed to make that corner, but it's too much of a seam allowance. So I need to go back and maybe just do one more stitch. Let's see if that works. Yes. We'll turn that corner. And I am back stitching down here. Okay. So before I go to iron or press this, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take this corner right here, and I'm just going to snip a little bit off of that corner. And then I'm going to just kind of go up a little ways and snip, and come this way and snip a little bit. And that will make that corner turn just a little bit nicer on that edge there. Okay. So now I'm going to do a little bit of pressing, okay, because I found that this works the easiest for me. So I'm going to kind of reach inside this and with my iron, and I'm going to go all the way down to the bottom with my iron, and I'm just going to press this seam out. And I don't know if I can get it where see it a little bit easier. But I'm just pushing that seam to one direction, okay? And then as I come around this corner here, I'm going to come up the side, and I'm just going to press that seam out. When I then turn this to sew the other way, it makes it a lot easier for me in making that those edges come out and for me to be able to stitch that. Okay, so let me just go one more time down here and basically just kind of pressing that out right along the seam line. Okay, so, and you can see then how that is pressed nice over to the seam. Okay, and this bottom one then is also pressed away, you know, one direction. Okay, so I'm going to take this, I'm going to turn it wrong side out. So then I have my right sides together. Okay, reach down and grab this corner one here, and I'm going to just push that out. Now once in a while we might need to use a little corner point turner, or we can just grab a little straight pin and just pull that corner out nice and straight. Okay, so I've got that one out, and I have this one over here out as well. And then there's not as much bulk in this corner because we trimmed out that extra there. Okay. So if I lay it down here, okay, and I pull that out along there, just with my fingernail where I press that seam, I'm just going to do a quick, just pull that seam out along the edge there, do a quick press, and then we're going to do the same thing along this line here. And this just makes it a lot easier when you go to sew that seam. So, and by pressing it the first time before we turned it, that seam is already trained to lay pretty flat. So you don't have to do a lot else with it. Okay? So I'm going to take this over to the board, and I'm going to go ahead and put a few pins in it just to make it easier for me. So I'll put them in this way so it's easier to take it out as I'm sewing that seam in there. Now the first seam that I did was 1/4 inch, and so my next seam that I do is going to be a little bit wider than 1/4 inch, because the whole purpose of this is that I don't have any raw edges showing on either side. And so when I turn this right side out, I certainly don't want any raw edges poking through. So we'll take just a little bit bigger seam allowance. Okay. And as I come up to here, I definitely want to make sure that this is going to be my bulky area. I want to make sure that I can get a nice stitch over that area. And then I have my end up here. And those should all match up. Alright, so we have one more seam to do on 2 sides, and we're finished. So let's go back here. And I'm going to put this at 3/8 then. And I am going to lengthen my stitch to 2.0 for this particular one. Get started and back stitch. Okay, now I got that bulky area here, so kind of have to be a little bit slow and make sure that it doesn't get off kilter or throws me off to the side or anything like that. Oftentimes I find I go over that twice to make sure that it's a nice, good seam. So by pressing that as I go on that, it just lays nice and flat and sews right up. going to do one tiny thing different down at the corner. When I think I'm almost to the point of when I turn it, I'm going to be 3/8. I'm going to just put it at an angle and just do like maybe 2 tiny stitches. And then turn. 2 is too many. So let's go back 1. Okay, so just like 1.5 stitch across that corner. And when I get to this corner, I'm going to back stitch again. Make sure it is secure. Alright, and so before I turn it right side out, I'm just going to go back and check this bulky area, and it looks really good in there, so I'm going to leave it. Now these threads I'm just going to trim up right on the area there, right on the edge. Make sure I don't cut my fabric, that would not be good. So we are done with the sewing part, and I can turn my pillowcase right side out, poke my corner out a little bit there and here, do a nice press up on it. Okay. So we'll do a nice press on all those edges, and when I do that, I kind of bunch it up like this so I can get that edge out, and I kind of run along there real quick, okay? Because it'll make it, I'm not putting too much over here, but it'll make that edge seem like this, where you can just kind of pull it out, roll it, and pull it out, and then do a firm press on there. So we'll do that on the bottom without burning my fingers. Okay. Makes it press a little bit easier to do it that way. And so also on the side then, I'm just going to kind of bunch it up like that and run it down real quick. Oops. Okay, so that I can bring this here, try to make it so you can see here. So I can bring it like this and press that out. And press. Okay. Press. And get this bulky area right there. And that edge there. That one I'll give it a shot of steam because that's a lot of layers right there. Alrighty, and so the rest of it, from there, then I can kind of bring that and kind of smooth that around and on the bottom. So I am, going over it, just kind of gliding over it. But I do have the weight of the iron in my hands, so I'm not just putting it on there and letting the whole weight go down on the fabric. I still am controlling how much of the iron weight goes onto the pillowcase, onto the fabric. So I'm not stretching it or anything. And there we have our finished pillowcase. All done.